Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile 1 discussion. Big news today, although it's news that we had already correctly guessed. Patch 3.26 is coming on June the 13th, so Friday the 13th for those of you that are in the United States, Canada and similar time zones, and for those of you like me that are over in Australia, it's going to be Saturday, June the 14th. This is the time that we've been speculating during this week. Unfortunately, it is a time that doesn't work for me, so I am going to be missing the first 2 days of League Start. I know most people watching this would prefer the 13th to the 20th, or the 13th to the 27th. I'm going to be that one contrarian that would have preferred it to be the other way around, but that's the way it goes. No time works for everyone. Anyways, let's talk today about what we know about Secrets of the Atlas. That's right, we know the name of this expansion, and this one's an interesting one, because historically, every single expansion that's had the word Atlas in it has seen a major shake-up of PathOfExile 1's endgame. The first one of these, Atlas of Worlds patch 2.4, was the one that introduced the Shaper, as well as a number of other, at the time, significant pinnacle bosses. So you had, as the ultimate pinnacle boss, you had the Shaper, and then as a step down from that, you had the Guardian of the Hydra, the Guardian of the Chimera, Guardian of the Minotaur, Guardian of the Phoenix. There has been a very large amount of power creep since then, and those bosses are not really considered very difficult anymore. They're more of a stepping stone, but at the time they were a big addition to the endgame. But the main feature of this expansion was the idea of connection between the maps, and a couple of things that were designed to work on that, such as the old sextant system. This granted a level of customization over endgame that hadn't previously been available. You could make it so that certain maps could or could not drop, and you would also be able to raise the tier of certain maps, which is something Grinding Gear games have gone a lot further with over the intervening time. Fast forward a little bit, and we get to patch 3.1. 3.1 was War for the Atlas. This was the one that introduced the Elder and the Elder Guardians. Now, the Uber Elder encounter that we know and love today, this was not introduced until 3.2, but 3.1 introduced the base Elder fight, which was a lot harder back then than it is now, and also those 4 Guardians. On top of that, this was probably the single biggest increase in player power in any one expansion. Why do I say that? It introduced Shaper and Elder influenced items. Now, whilst these have fallen behind the power curve because there's been a lot more power creep since, at the time they were definitely among the most powerful things going around. On top of that, you also had a number of new systems added to the Atlas. You had the concept of the Shaper and the Elder occupation of various territories, and you had various options that you could take part in there. You could either run the maps that the game was encouraging you to run, or you could try and manipulate the game in order to set it up so that it would focus on the maps you wanted to run. There's a lot to learn in that. It's a very complicated system, but ultimately it would be overhauled again in the next of the Atlas expansion, which was Conquerors of the Atlas, patch 3.9. 3.9 introduced Cyrus and the 4 Elder Slayers, Baran, Veritania, Alhesman, and Drox. These fights would become new bosses that you would encounter all through the endgame, because the way that it was originally set up, those 4 Conquerors, the lesser ones, not Cyrus himself, will be encountered from fairly early in white tier maps. Probably by the time you did your 25th map, you'd start going up against the 4 Conquerors. After that, the next major endgame expansion would be Echoes of the Atlas, 3.13. This introduced the Maven as a new pinnacle boss, and all of the Maven's various arenas, such as Maven's Invitation the Feared. Maven's Invitation the Elder Slayers would come a little bit later, but all the rest of them were there from then. And on top of introducing the Maven as a new pinnacle boss, it added the concept of an Atlas passive tree. Not in the familiar form we have today, but the Atlas was divided into 8 little octants, and each of them had its own very small passive tree. Once you did various Maven-related content, you would then expand the number of points you could spec into that tree, and ultimately you could spend up to 10 in each of the 8 different regions. This would be the meta for another year, after which we hit 3.17, the most recent something of the Atlas expansion, and this was Siege of the Atlas. Siege of the Atlas introduced the Searing Exarch and the Eater of Worlds as new major bosses, the Black Star and the Infinite Hunger as new mini-bosses, and on top of that introduced Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds implicits, which could be added to items, a whole bunch of crafting systems, but the most significant thing here was the overhaul of the Atlas passive tree system. Instead of having one Atlas passive tree for Lexajorka that had 10 points in it, and another one for Haywak Hamlet that had 10 points in it, none of that anymore. Now you just had one Atlas passive tree that applied to the entirety of your Atlas. So that's where we are at the moment. Grinding Gear games then made some changes to the way that they run endgame expansions from 3.18 onwards. Where previously they'd had a release structure of large expansion, small expansion, small expansion, small expansion, they shifted instead to just constant medium expansions. And so a number of major features that might have been held onto for quite a while and then bundled into an annual large expansion, such as the Uber versions of Pinnacle bosses that were added in patch 3.18, or all of the Atlas keystones that were added in 3.20, or the introduction of the first incarnation of Tier 17 maps in patch 3.24. All of these were released when they were ready, rather than being sat on for some indeterminate amount of time until the fourth expansion came around. That's been what they've been doing lately, but the name Secrets of the Atlas implies maybe they've decided to go back to the way that they did things a few years ago. That is something we'll have to learn more about when we get to the upcoming GGG live event. Now, let's talk about the way that Grinding Games tend to run spoiler seasons for Path of Exile 1. It's not always exactly the same, but there's a pretty common pattern where 3 weeks out, they release minor teasers. These are often worth really digging deep into, but they'll be things that aren't necessarily exciting to the most new players. Instead, there'll be things that are exciting to enfranchised players, new build around uniques that maybe aren't something that's so powerful that it goes on every build ever imagined. There'll be new divination cards. There'll be a number of little things like that. Additionally, if they've decided to make substantial balance changes that they feel need their own write-up, this is typically the time that they will announce those write-ups during this 3rd week out. So that's next week. During next week, I'm kind of expecting we might get one small teaser every day. Then 2 weeks out, they start to ramp things up a bit. And this is because they want to get the people who have completely disconnected from Path of Exile 1 news paying attention to the game again. So this is when they'll start putting out some more exciting pieces of information during that 2nd week. That then culminates on the GGG live event. The GGG live event will be when they will make their major announcement of everything that's to be expected in the Secrets of the Atlas expansion. This will take place on Twitch primarily, although I might end up multi-streaming it to YouTube myself, depending on whether that ends up working well. There's been a number of changes behind the scenes where that's now an option in a way that it wasn't, but I've got to make sure that I can get the chat experience working well if I go ahead down that route. The reason though that Twitch is such a big deal with that is that the Twitch side of things, Grinding Your Games have a promo where everyone that has a Twitch account and a Grinding Your Games account, the links the two together and then watches on Twitch for a certain minimum time. It's often 45 minutes, but that's not yet confirmed. They will end up receiving some sort of free MTX on their game account. Typically, Grinding Your Games will pick something that's a wing or cloak or something in that slot that's been around for a little while, but sometimes they do mix things up a little bit. And this is the sort of time that they might be mixing things up, so we'll have to see exactly what they do there. And then after that, the final week leading up to the release of the event, that's going to be when we'll have enough information to theorycraft. So typically we'll get the patch notes on the day of the GGG live event. That is not guaranteed. That's not the way that Path of Exile 2's 0.2.0 release went, but hopefully we'll get them on the GGG live event. And that's when you can start really theory crafting builds for builds that can exist in the game as it is now. For builds that can't possibly exist in the game now, so things that are based around a new skill gem or a new support gem that doesn't exist as yet, you'll need to wait until Grinding Your Games drop 2020 gem stats in order to theory craft those, and that typically comes out a bit later. That's typically 3 or 4 days before the expansion goes live, but there's no absolute guarantee that that timeline will be adhered to. Anyways, my plans for this period, I'm going to cover everything Path of Exile 1 related that comes out. I'm going to try to go to daily videos if Grinding Your Games put out enough content to merit that. If they don't put out enough content to merit that, then I'll put out videos that'll be bundled together. Another thing I've started doing recently that people may or may not have noticed, my thumbnails, if it's a Path of Exile 1 related video, I'm trying to remember to have a black border on them. And if it's a Path of Exile 2 related video, it'll be something that is a light colored border on it. That's something I've started doing lately because I've done a bit of a poll of my audience. 60% of you play both games, 20% PoE 1 only, 20% PoE 2 only. And so for that quite substantial minority that just don't care about one of the games, that's something I'm trying to do to make it easier for you to find the videos that you're interested in. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. May Valorbs have interesting results, and I'll see you back in Rayclast a couple of days into Secrets of the Atlas when I'm finally able to sit down and play the new expansion.